I'll be splitting my time with the Member of Parliament for South Okanagan, West Kootenay. I want to extend, more than anything, sincere thanks to the members of the Nanaimo, Ladysmith and Gabriola detachments of the RCMP for the work they do in our community, in the riding that I'm honored to serve. There are 159 sworn members of the RCMP who form the ranks in our riding, and they join 18,000 members from across the country. And when we talk today about Bill C-7, I'm remembering that it doesn't only affect officers in our riding and across the country, but it affects their families, their spouses, grandparents, children, their classmates, our entire Canadian community. To remind us what it is that we're debating here today, I have an email that was sent to me by Robin Buchanan. She writes, members of the RCMP have waited a long time with lower than fair wages due to both Conservative and Liberal governments. This past weekend, they are banding together by removing their yellow stripes from the side of their uniforms. This peaceful protest is to speak to the government and let them know that they're dissatisfied with safety issues and wage issues. Plainclothes members and members of the public are showing their support by wearing yellow ribbons. Often these ribbons are made from the very stripes that are removed from the uniform. I can make you a ribbon myself, as my husband is an RCMP officer on Vancouver Island." End quote. Now, I'm wearing one of those ribbons today, as are many members here in the House. I also have a note, April 4th. David Buchanan wrote to me saying, "The Treasury Board's stance is that as an RCMP member, I am just another federal employee. I assure you we're not just average federal employees. I was one of the first police on the scene at the Nanaimo Mill shooting. I ran toward the gunfire and not away. I also arrest countless impaired, unlicensed, and dangerous drivers. I am not just another federal employee. I am a police officer. We should be compensated as police officers. I put my life on the line. RCMP members have the added stress of feeling undervalued and unsupported by our government. We are watching police officers fall to post-traumatic stress disorder on a daily basis, yet we are considered just another federal employee. I am just one police officer attempting to make things right for my other police brothers and sisters." End quote. So these fine men and women do dangerous work on our behalf. And collective bargaining is about respect. It's about fostering respect for workers and their rights, creating a safe working environment, and rewarding workers for their dedication and growth. It allows employees to have a voice and enables employers to listen. The cornerstone of collective bargaining is that respect. And this is a right that is enjoyed by a vast majority of federal workers, and those rights generally allowed workers to be part of the conversation about staffing levels, deployment, relocation, sexual harassment, except for the RCMP. That's what the courts ruled in 2015, and they ruled that it must change. And so, we appreciate that the bill in front of us today does include those elements, the workplace safety, sexual harassment being allowed to be collectively bargained. We heard that loud and clear from RCMP members over the last year and a half that they've been writing us letters. And especially I want to say that the extent of sexual harassment in the force has been widely documented, widely covered in the media. And that makes it especially troubling to me that it was explicitly excluded from the first version of this government's bill, which we debated a year ago. On workplace safety, rural officers have special concerns. I think in particular of the terrible tragedies in Mayerthorpe and Moncton, where there was terrible loss of life of RCMP members, and there remain issues as to the extent to which they were protected. These men and women stand up for us, and we should stand up for them. Here's a letter sent to me by Thomas Trashell. He writes, "The RCMP has fallen so far behind almost every other police force in Canada in almost every area that we are literally on the verge of breaking. We are near the bottom of pay in the Canadian police forces. Our training opportunities now routinely lag behind that of most other police forces, and our equipment is often years out of date or decades behind schedule being deployed. If the government restricts us to negotiating pay and benefits alone, that may help us recruit more people, but it won't stop our members from dying because they're working alone in remote places without radio communications or proper backup, because local managers create interpretive backup policies or ignore them altogether. It won't stop overworked people from descending into depression, losing families, and committing suicide. It won't stop abusive managers from bullying and intimidating the men and women that they supervise. It won't fix our broken promotion system. It won't promote any change in the imbalance of power between management and employees in the RCMP that has bred a culture of fear and distrust of management among many members, a culture which actively opposes innovation and creativity. Please tell the government that RCMP members deserve to be given the dignity of being free to bring all matters relevant to our working conditions to the bargaining table, a freedom that every other police force in Canada enjoys, so that we can begin to truly fix our own problems from within. So how did the government, so end quote there. So how did the government embrace this plea for support and this call to action? The government bill that we were debating a year ago excluded staffing, deployment, harassment, and discipline from collective bargaining. Most witnesses at the committee that studied Bill C-7 expressed great concern about what was left out of this collective bargaining agreement. And in the New Democrats' view, this meant that the bill failed to live up to the court's direction. But the government members voted down our amendments at committee, which would have brought those vital topics into collective bargaining and would have amended the bill at that time. The government then shut down debate a year ago, last May, because it was so urgent that we move forward. Then the Senate did its work. It did it quickly, and it removed those exclusions from collective bargaining. It allowed those matters to be included in the legislation for the purposes of collective bargaining. And it reported to the government in June 2016. And the government sat on those changes, those Senate changes, for 11 months. Now, I still feel if the government had taken the opposition advice a year ago, they could have incorporated those amendments in early and could have given RCMP members some satisfaction that they were being heard. I'm glad that they are listening to the Senate's advice on this matter, but still, the government only told us this 5 days ago, that stakeholders didn't hear before then, and that it is shutting down debate tonight. I believe I'm the second last speaker. So we've had closure on debate twice on a bill that's still not perfect, and we can't tell whether the current amendments, as they are being received by the government, which of the Senate amendments they're going to receive, we can't tell entirely whether they are going to accommodate all of the supports that our men and women on the front line need to be safe themselves while they keep our communities safe. I'll end by noting what Corporal Clover Johns from Nanaimo reminded me. He said that members of the House have what RCMP members do not now have. We hold the power to listen and to voice their concerns when they were not afforded an opportunity to do so. We have the power to enact just laws that enhance the National Police Force, to treat its members fairly, and to advance public safety in Canada. We should do that today, and we should guarantee members of the police in Canada equitable, open, and harmonious labour practices.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? The honourable member for Vancouver Quadra.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the words of my NDP colleague across the aisle and the personal stories that she mentioned. Bill C-7 and our response to both the House Committee and the Senate amendments gives labor relations and collective bargaining regime that will allow RCMP members to stand up for their rights and to address issues of workplace well-being and harassment, as she has pointed out, is so critically important. Our government listened to the Senate, listened to members of Parliament of all parties, expanded the issues which are now available for collective bargaining. So I'd like to ask, will this member support this important piece of legislation?
The honourable member for Nanaimo Ladysmith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll note that it took a year for the government to hear the advice from the opposition members, and we only heard 5 days ago that the government was going to take the advice that the Senate had delivered to the government 11 months ago. So we are really in a crunch here. I'm hearing just kind of a few messages from people in the within the RCMP community that they don't understand the government's new language around management rights being inserted into the legislation. We haven't had time to study this. It's a new idea. It looks like it gives power to the RCMP commissioner to ensure that police operations are effective. But that might just override all of those other pieces of collective bargaining, depending on how that's interpreted. So without more time to study that language, I mean, I'm going to be just before the vote talking with my colleagues in the opposition lobby to find out if they've had any more satisfaction during debate today on this matter. Because I'm glad to see the new language that we asked for a year ago and that RCMP members asked us to advocate for a year ago at committee, gravitated now, as of 5 days ago, into the government's legislation. But I don't know how the police associations, how the members themselves are feeling about that and whether they think that this is actually going to protect their interests.